People in churches, don't let your pastor get away without speaking on this issue. Like, be persistent and speak up. Be that voice for the voiceless, because that's what has to happen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our segment, Humans of the Pro-Life Movement, an initiative of the Pro-Life Guys podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. For those of you who are new to this program and to this series, our goal with Humans of the Pro-Life Movement is to normalize pro-life work, normalize the fight against abortion. We want to highlight that anyone can get involved in this great injustice that permeates our nation here in Canada, permeates the nation of the United States, which is where our guest today is from, and really permeates nations and cultures around the world. This is the greatest injustice of our time and one of the greatest throughout history. And so we want to show and highlight that anyone can get involved in standing up for the vulnerable and the marginalized, those who are really in the womb, which is the most dangerous place in our culture today. And so to talk about some of the work that is being done, I've invited someone who's new to me. I almost said he's a friend of mine, but hopefully he'll be a friend at the end of this. But I haven't met him before. He's Pastor David Henderson from, I really should have done my homework beforehand, somewhere in the United States. I'm sure he will share where. But Pastor David, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me on Humans of the Pro-Life Movement.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invite. We're right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
Here. So,
yeah. Maybe to answer a few more questions of mine, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? Who is Pastor David?
Yeah.
What are some of the things you enjoy and so on?
Yeah, well, I'm David Henderson. I've been married for 29 years, so we're rolling through our 30th year right now, and excited about that. My wife and I, Mindy, have 8 kids, and that's kind of kept us really busy. My youngest just turned 16, so my car insurance rates are outrageous right now, with several drivers. Family is really the core of this thing for me, and so I have my oldest daughter is 25. She's never been married. She fosters 4 kids right now, and so those are my grandkids, and that's kind of a little window of our family. Just a little more detail about that is, we have 4 biological kids and 4 through adoption, and so that's obviously a gigantic heartbeat for us. But just beyond that, I'm a Tennessee Vol fan. I don't know how that plays up in Canada, but everybody down here loves Rocky Top, and we enjoy a lot of sports. I'm a beekeeper, and I'm 1 year into that little journey, and that's an amazing journey for me. And we just love just being around people and getting together. At board games are always out at my house. Settlers of Catan right now is the game of choice, as well as several others. But that's a little snapshot of who we are.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. And I love the fact that you've adopted, there's foster children in your family. And I think that highlights a greater worldview, right? More than just fighting abortion, there's something bigger at play here in valuing life and seeking to really give opportunity to those around us who perhaps don't have it, and to really be a blessing to others. But talking about abortion, I'm just curious. So you're passionate about life. You've adopted. There's your daughter you mentioned has a number of foster children. What was it though that got you involved in the fight against abortion?
When you think about the early parts of it, is really my dad. I remember being in high school and my dad being involved in pro-life causes. My dad was a CEO, business guy. He was a former Navy weapons officer on a nuclear submarine, and he wrote me and my siblings a letter one time, just to try to explain his involvement in pro-life work. And he just said, I didn't serve in the military during World War II, but I always told myself, like, if I was serving, I would hope that I would have, done everything I could do to stop that kind of evil. And then his next line just said to me and my siblings, but if I'm doing nothing about the cause of the unborn, I don't think I can say that. And so, that's just a simple letter that he wrote to us, just to kind of help us understand where he was involved and what he was doing. And so that's really where it starts for me. And so, it's being a um, high school kid in a family that regularly went to church and just a great church and all that setting, but Dad's involvement specifically with some, at the time, Operation Rescue and some things that were going on there, led him to. He was arrested at one point, and that's really what led him to write the letter. And so that might not mean a whole lot to some people, but I mean, I can't even remember seeing my dad break a speed limit. Uh, like he is, the epitome of a rule follower, and that's really what led him to write this letter, is to help us understand, like, why would he put this kind of risk or take these kind of steps in that setting to do that. And so that's where it really got real clear to me. I mean, I think I've always been passionate about, um, fatherlessness is really my theme or my topic that drives me here biblically. Um, and so, but that's kind of where, when you look back, that's where it starts.
Yeah, that's great. I have a tremendous amount of respect for your dad's generation, those people who, went to the abortion clinics, locked themselves in front of it, did everything they could to ensure that no one could make it through those front doors. And I think I agree with you that it doesn't mean a lot to people because people don't really know the history of the fight of abortion in America. Maybe it's something we should do in the program, a little bit of a series on that. But I really want to highlight one of the points you mentioned as well, that if we weren't doing like we love to say that if I lived in that time period in history in the past, I would have been a stalwart and a beacon of truth and justice and beauty and goodness and everything else that embodies, a real man of integrity and character. But the real reality is, as it were, if we're not doing something about the great injustices of our time, we would be extremely foolish to say that we would have been in any way involved in fighting injustices in the past. And so that's a real lesson. I really love that.
I think it goes deeper than as well there, because it's not just fighting injustice, it's fighting this injustice. Because, you think, okay, you're in Germany, in the late 1930s or early 40s, and you're fighting poverty. Like, okay, I'm not saying it's not important, but you're rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic that's going, like, and I think that's really important for, I'm 51, and so the kids' age, the 20s, those in their 20s and 30s, these justice warriors out there that attach themselves to. I'm not saying they're not important issues, but if you want to attach yourself to one of those issues and you're not attaching yourself to this one, you're just unaware, at the very minimum, of what is actually happening and the death toll that this issue is bringing to lives after lives. So,
well, let's talk about that for a second. So there seems to be this idea that maybe permeates, but certainly exists within the evangelical community, that pastors, should focus on shepherding their flock and taking care of their local congregation rather than getting involved in political engagement and abortion and some of these other social issues. But if they get involved in social issues, they ought to be the same ones that the culture at large is involved in, and speaking about the things that everyone else already agrees with. So could you speak to, I mean, you did it briefly already, but maybe speak a little bit more to this particular injustice and why it's important for pastors specifically, for church leaders specifically, for those who are leading the flock, for elders, whoever it might be. Why is it important for the leaders to get involved in this sort of work?
I mean, this is deep passion, but it wells up honestly from the scriptures. I mean, um, people have referred to me. You know, you have wartime generals and peacetime generals, and I've been referred to as a wartime pastor, um, and not so much a peacetime pastor. But I think several things drive me there. First of all, I don't shy away from conflict. When somebody says, "Hey, you kind of feel like a wartime pastor," I'm like, well, here's the reality that we live in: is we live in this spiritual battle that is a war between good and evil. And if you're not understanding, if you're not living every day from that foundation, the enemy's probably taking ground in your life if that's not an awareness of you. And when I look in the scriptures, the thing that gets me is too, like, number one, father to the fatherless, defender of widows. This is God. Psalm 68. It's genuinely like the very few times in the scriptures where there's a description given and it says, "This is God. This is who He is." And so fatherlessness can look that can go a lot of ways, and we go a lot of ways with that. But then you get to the New Testament and you talk about, like, hey, let's be imitators of God. Let's do let's do what God would do. And you put those two verses together, and when you put the lens of fatherlessness on this world and this society, like, the wars are endless, and it's war because in the battle, in the spiritual battle between good and evil, when it comes to earth, children are always in the crosshairs. They're always in the crosshairs. It's true in Pharaoh's Egypt with Moses. And of course, this wasn't the unborn, but it was the next step of vulnerability. And we're going to execute and drown every Hebrew child. It's true in first century Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It's the battle between good and evil, and children die. And it's the same battle in Old Testament in the Moloch, and kids sacrificed to the idols. Like, it's genuinely what we're doing today. We're sacrificing kids to the idols of convenience, to the idols of quote progress, or however we can become more enlightened. We're sacrificing kids to the idols of overpopulation and all that goes along with that lie. And it's just a spiritual battle. And so when I read the scriptures and I look at this issue, like, I get really frustrated with pastors who aren't on the topic of abortion. When you look at those child and you put fatherless tab on those children, I think our responsibility is so painfully clear that my burden is actually for the pastors that aren't speaking on the day that they answer for what they're doing and what they're not doing. So it's pretty passionate for me. So
Yeah, amen. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for outlining some of the examples throughout scripture, and some of the instructions that we have. And when I think about it as well, I mean, there seems to be no one more fatherless in our culture than those whose fathers are driving their mothers and them to an abortion clinic to be torn apart piece by piece.
Yeah.
And so if we actually want to live as God calls us to live and to represent Him here, perhaps that's the first place we need to go. Is the abortion clinics. So could you talk about that as well? You spend time in front of the abortion clinics. You spend time fighting for the lives of these preborn children, along with really fighting for the mothers and fathers not to do this great sin and this great injustice. So could you speak perhaps to some of the stories that you have from outside of the clinics, some of the really works of God and the testimonies that you have from what He's done outside of the clinics while you and perhaps some of your parishioners were out there witnessing?
Yeah, I'm not a pro at outside the abortion clinic. I've been several times, but I don't want to misrepresent. Andre Gonzalez from Love Life invited me to come down. It's an organization that mobilizes the church to step into this fight. And they're in our city here in Charlotte, and he invited me to come down on Wednesday. Um, and I took him up on his offer, and they kind of walked me through what they do in a prayer walk. And honestly, like at the end of that day, I just had to repent. I'm passionate about this cause, but I never, I, you know, I didn't find routes of active involvement uh, present at the clinic. And so when I walk through an hour journey of prayer and what they lead the church through on Saturday, I literally just said, "Hey, I am sorry. I need to repent of my lack of involvement, my lack of support." And that was maybe 3.5 years ago to those guys, because this is somebody, like, I'm ramped up on this as a pastor. Now, this is one reason that pastors don't get involved, and maybe I should have shared this earlier. But like in my view, there's the gospel has to you have to maintain the preeminence of the gospel in the church setting. And there are in my view, two really great topics that tend to hijack the gospel. Now listen, this is gospel work, but what I mean by that is back in the 90s with the Promise Keeper movement and all that stuff, like this men's racial reconciliation and all that, it like blew through the church, and it needed to, okay, but it became the mission. The mission in a lot of churches like ceased to be getting the gospel to the world. And it became, we don't really care about that so much anymore, as long as we have this racial reconciliation. The pro-life movement is the same as that. There are churches that are passionately pro-life and passionate about the whole movement, and it becomes greater in the church than the gospel. We moved here to Charlotte 21 years ago to start a church in our living room, and so that's the church we pastor now. And that's been one of the things that I feel like God has said, hey, like you got to make sure that we're reaching lost people and that we're not turning people off to the message of the gospel with other really good but secondary topics. Okay, so that presents me a real challenge in this. Like, how do I get involved? How do I lead a church to get involved without pushing a lost world away from opportunities to hear the gospel at our church? And so I was navigating that in the context of really meeting these guys. And then when I saw what they do at the clinics, and it's just a movement of prayer and worship, I'm like, first of all, I'm sorry I hadn't been here. Secondly, like from this point forward, you tell me what you need, and we're at your service, really. And that's really been a relationship that I've had with the guys at Love Life. But then you mobilize your church to move down there, and when we mobilize the church, we mobilize them to fast and pray. We talk about the issue on Sunday, full service, and then Wednesday we fast, and then Saturday we show up. And when we show up at the clinic, we spend maybe 30 minutes in worship and prayer on the specific topics. And then we do a little prayer walk that ends up walking in front of the clinic. And we usually pause there and pray and worship for another 10 minutes or so. But when you're there, it is, the way I describe it to our church, it's the closest that you're going to get to the gates of hell on earth. Like people are ushering people into the slaughter right in front of you. The vileness that is coming against you, like sometimes this far from your face, it wakes you up. I tell my people this: listen, evil exists because of its ability to deceive. Like Satan's strategy is deception, and so evil rarely shows itself manifest itself so clearly, because otherwise it'll be seen for what it is. And when the people in our church go down to the clinic and they feel that vileness coming at them, it shocks them, and they're like, wow, like why would somebody be so passionate about defending somebody, like, and usher them in to execute and dismember, like, and it's just the reality of that spiritual battle that shows up, and you see it. And I think for a lot of people in our church, that just is like, wow, I had no idea that this is what is happening. And so that happens, 40 weeks a year in our city. Our church, jumps in really strong once or twice a year to adopt a week and all that, and we support a lot of other stuff that's going on. But one quick story about how that's impacted people in my church is, I mean, there's just a mountain of a man. He's a good old boy, and he's just I won't say he's like a spiritual warrior or anything, but he's been around our church for several years, and just pretty much just come on Sunday, and he's been on a trip or two with me. But he came up to me one Sunday and he said, "Hey, Dave, I just want you to know yesterday changed my life." And I was like, wow, that's like a really big discussion starter, because I didn't know what he's talking about. And he'd gone down with his son on a week that we weren't, we weren't scheduled to be involved at Love Life, but he went down to the abortion clinic with Love Life, and that was the first time he'd been down there. And just tears in his eyes, like it just like I just can't believe I haven't woken up to what the reality is. And so those are the things that are happening down at the clinic. There's a lot more, when you talk about fatherlessness at the clinic, when fathers are involved, like it, fathers, when fathers are involved, most of those women choose life. And so, like, that's a reality that we just can't avoid. And if there's a father that says, yes, I'm willing to, like, have this child, then the majority of the time those women say yes. And so when you take that and you say, okay, for those women that are going in without a male, without a father, like, how can we be that? And it's impossible to replace that. But being a father to the fatherless is exactly what replacement looks like. It's exactly the command. And so, how can we get them to a free ultrasound that's right there? How can we support them when they say yes? And I mean, we've got mentors that help women who say yes. And our church has thrown baby shower after baby shower and diaper shower after diaper shower for anyone who has said yes, and hey, I need some support. And so those are just a lot of things that go on when you go down to a clinic and you wake up to the battle. Doesn't have to be fought face to face, but it does need to be fought.
So you've talked about how you stood in front of the clinic with Love Life and you had to repent, but now your church is involved. Could you speak to how your participation in fighting abortion, you getting involved in standing out in front of the clinic and repenting from previous inaction, can you speak to how that has impacted the way that your church now responds to abortion?
Yeah, I mean, leaders are important, and it's not about leadership with a voice, and it's not a leadership with a finger that's pointing and saying, "Hey, go that way." Like, it's incumbent on leader. Like, we have an American leadership model that is just about a voice, and it's not about action. It's about leadership and fame and popularity and attention and social media and all that goes. And when you pull back the curtain on that's all a lot of people are doing, is just speaking. And so when we lead in our setting, we just lead with action. We don't don't ask anybody to do anything we're not willing to do ourselves or aren't currently doing ourselves. And when it comes to this topic, like, um, you know, being father to the fatherless, it only means action. Like, you can't father somebody without action. And so being a father to the fatherless, even that term, even that verse, we take it and we rip it apart from action. And we just talk about a title. Oh, well, you're a father figure to me, or well, you're and a pet name for dad, Pops, or whatever else, that you want to title it. But when you say being a father, it's action. And so for us on this, when I moved on this, obviously, like, and invite people to come with me, that's what we do. And it's just like, come and see. Like, can you pray? Yes, I can pray. Oh, okay, let's do a prayer walk. It's prayer and worship. And then, after you do it a few times and maybe they don't respond, you say, hey, what's keeping you? Like, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid is going to happen down there? And you wrestle kind of at that level. And then you say, like, hey, tell me what's the worst thing that you can imagine happening if you showed up? But it has to be that action. And if you're not active, and there's a million ways to get active, but it does kind of start somewhere. And for us and leading our church, it started with that prayer walk, because now people that maybe, okay, I showed up, but now I didn't realize that they have mentors, and I'm not really like being down on the sidewalk while that's, impactful and understanding. I'm more like one-on-one, and like, we have a group of mentors that they're, in line, ready for the next woman who says, yes, I want to keep my baby. Great. Why don't you, like, we have somebody that'll meet with you, every week for however long you want to, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, like they'll walk with you. And it's chaotic walk. And we've found somebody that says, oh, now that's me. And then, you got, hey, we can throw parties and showers and organize some things to get things done. And so then it just starts to build from there. Like, it takes on a whole new life of its own. But it comes back to just action and doing it and starting somewhere. And you don't have to do everything, but you do have to do something. For us, that boils way over into a lot more discussions about action when it comes to foster care, when it comes to the orphan crisis, because these are not separate issues. These are all, this is a fatherless world, and God is calling us to be His imitator in being a father to the fatherless. And when you put that lens on, like, you better get busy, because there's so much fatherlessness. So that's, I don't know, that's just we got to do it. We got to be the people that are doing it first.
Yeah, that's right. And as we wrap up, I was going to ask you about perhaps a call to action that you had for pastors and church leaders in specific, but also other Christians as well. Now, you've spoken a lot about why we ought to get involved. So maybe, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of encouragement or providing motivation for those who perhaps are on the fence, pastors who are like, is this being a social justice warrior type, if I get involved in abortion? So could you sort of speak to that as we wrap this up? Well, call to action for other Christians and Christian leaders to get involved.
Yeah, I'm probably pretty harsh on Christian leaders. You guys frustrate me to death with your lack of action. There's a stat out there that there would be no kids in foster care if just one church, one family in every church would adopt a child. Okay. And pastors actually speak that, but the pastors who are speaking it don't realize that we don't even need a family in every church to adopt a child. If every pastor would adopt a child out of foster care, there would be no kids in foster care. Like, and that's the problem. Like, we got to be those people. If you're a Christian leader and you're ignoring this problem, and ignoring the implications of it, like, your credibility is shot when any other justice issue comes up. Are we involved with service to the poor? Absolutely, we're involved with service to the poor. Poverty is not killing what abortion is killing. It's just not. And I mean, like, we are in some extreme poverty situations that we serve in regularly. Are we involved in housing crisis? Sure. Like, we are involved there. We're involved in all kinds of stuff, but it starts with this. And if you don't start with a passion for a million plus in our country, at least every year, then I don't know where else you start. You're not starting at a place of authenticity, because your credibility is shot if you're going to be a social justice person for any other topic and you exclude this topic. And this is why this topic is so important, because when it comes down to the politics, a lot of quote Christian leaders in our country are just they're just wrapped up with the liberal agenda, and unfortunately, it's tied to a Democratic Party. And I'm really love the few pro-life Democrats that are still existing in our country. They're a rare breed, and most of them are just in Louisiana now. But the reality is, a lot of Christian leaders, quote Christian leaders, they just don't believe the politics of it, and so they buy into a party that is about destruction, and they play that out. And my African American pastor friends, man, I'm sorry, but like, you got to divorce yourself from your political agenda and the Reverend Jesse's and Reverend Al's, and quit being Uncle Al's and Uncle Jesse's, and stand up for the black kids that are being executed and targeted for destruction, and your church is actually participating in that. Like, it's disgusting. And so I don't know. That's a tough call to action. I look, the general people in the church. Listen, you are the force, okay? Because there's only so much that a leader can do unless people are like with him. And so don't underestimate the power of just starting. And man, if you are passionate and you're doing something, like whether that's a prayer walk at an abortion clinic, or whether that's mentoring, or whether that's caring in any way, and speaking on this issue with different people, like, if you'll just advocate with your pastor, like, be that persistent widow, be the person that drives your pastor crazy until he says, okay, enough. I don't want to do anything about this. I never do anything, but I want you to shut up. So what does it take to shut you up? Okay, be that person. Drive your pastor crazy. Because I'm telling you, like when people come to me and they're persistent, it's not always I'm not that slow, but sometimes I do want to know how, is this somebody that just wants me to do something about something they care about? Or and when they come to me 2 or 3 times and I see some action attached to that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to dive in with you, because I know you're not putting that in my court just for me to do something about it. I know that you're asking for my help, and when I come under you and support what you're already doing, then man, you can go further, and then actually you can just lead it, and I don't have to lead it. And so the people, you people in churches, don't let your pastor get away without speaking on this issue. Like, be persistent and speak up. Be that voice for the voiceless, because that's what has to happen.
That's a bold encouragement, as it were, but I think necessarily appropriate for the injustice that we are facing, and the real destruction of image bearers of God in the womb. But Pastor Henderson, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me on Humans of the Pro-Life Movement.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Good to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. That was Pastor Henderson from Charlotte, North Carolina, a pastor who is involved in the fight against abortion. We often, I think, expect our politicians to fight our battles for us, or perhaps some other organization, but God doesn't call others to love our neighbors for us. He calls us to love our neighbors. And our neighbors, our preborn children in our communities who need a voice. They are voiceless and they need someone to speak up for them. And so we want to encourage you to get involved. Pastor David is involved with Love Life America. You can find more about them, lovelife.org. They're not just in Charlotte, but they are working with churches across the nation of America to get people in front of the clinics, to get churches in front of the clinics, to be witnesses there in that, as Pastor David mentioned, the gates of hell. If you're in Canada, you can get involved with the organization I work for, the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Just check out our website, endthekilling.ca, and there's a bunch of options under the Take Action tab. If you reach out to us, we'll get you connected in communities across the country. If you're elsewhere, we want you to get involved as well. I mean, this injustice is not just limited to North America, but there are abortions taking place all over the world. This injustice is happening all over the world, so do get involved wherever you are. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are grateful for this. If you want to learn more about the podcast, you can check us out, prolifeguys.com. We have our full archive of episodes there as well, or do subscribe on YouTube, the Pro Life Guys podcast, or your favorite podcast catcher, be that Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts or music. Again, thank you so much. We hope you tune in again next time. God bless you all.